Hi friends, welcome back to Arc Tutorials. This is Angular 10 complete tutorial playlist for absolute beginners. In today's episode, we are going to learn all about observables, subscribe method, toPromise, understand the basics of how observable works. These are topics that a lot of people consider it to be complicated, complex, and tough to understand. But trust me, not after this video, because I will make sure that you will understand all of these topics in a very simple and easy to understand manner. And at the end of this tutorial, I'm sure that you will be able to master observables and how to use them. Let's get started. This is part 79 of the Angular 10 complete tutorial playlist. Make sure that you check out all the episodes in this particular series so that you can learn and master Angular end to end. Alright, before I start today's episode, I have a special request to you. That is, please do like and share this video with all your friends and colleagues whom you think that they can benefit by learning about observables and help them clear their doubts. Also, if you like my work in this episode, please do consider buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/arctutorials. Thank you in advance. So following are the topics that I've already covered in this particular series, from ground zero, from scratch to the most advanced complex use cases. And please go through them so that you can learn everything about Angular and master it. Today's topic is Angular Observable, Subscribe, and toPromise. So in this particular episode, we will take a different approach rather than how I do on every episode. Today, we will take this approach, which is keep your mind open and blank. That means you're learning everything from scratch. I will cover everything that you need to know about observable. First, I'll walk you through some technical words and theory that is used, and that will help you in terms of explaining it to your coworker or in interview, etc. Then I'll explain it in a very simple plain language so that you can easily understand and relate what those technical words are. And finally, we will be doing a lot of hands-on code examples that would help you build and write code from scratch and understand about observables. Let's get started. Alright, so first the technical part. What are observables? Observables are sequence of data that gets emitted from time to time or over a period of time. Now, it means that an observable will keep producing values, okay? And observables provide support for passing messages between different parts of our application. Angular uses observable very heavily under the hood. So if you talk about async operations, event handling, routing, HTTP, form changes, Angular uses observable for all these implementations. So hence it is an integral part of Angular that you should know and learn about observable. So if somebody asks you what is an observable, you should say it's a sequence of data that is emitted asynchronously most of the time over a period of time. Okay, I will explain you this also in detail when we do hands-on, like what do I mean by emitting data or sequence of data. Angular makes use of observables as an interface to handle a variety of common async operations. They are used frequently in Angular and are the recommended technique for event handling, async programming, and handling multiple values. Observable can deliver multiple values of any type, like literals, messages, events, etc. Whenever we talk about observable, there is also a concept called observer. Now what this does is, this is continuously listening to an observable and getting the data. Okay, so what do you do when you get data? Right, an observable has to produce that data. So you will say dot next, error, or complete. That means send the next data. Right, observer will say send the next data, or say complete this observable, or you can error out. So observer means, it means continuously listening to an observable for the data changes. Okay, then we'll have, just by creating an observable will not help anything. It is useless till you subscribe to it. So what is subscribe method? Subscribe method means listen to the data that is being sent by the observable, and then maybe we can do our logical processing or updating or working with that particular data that we get. So whenever you have an observable, you have to subscribe to it so that you get the new data in the output, right? So whenever observable will send new data, using subscribe we capture that data or the error. Okay, so we'll see that in detail, so don't worry if something you don't follow, because I'm going to explain it again in simple words for you. Then toPromise. Now toPromise means I told you that observable will produce values over a period of time. What happens if there is no change in data, right? So you don't necessarily, you will not be getting any new data. So that time we can use toPromise and say that we will make a request, we will get the data, and that's it. We are not bothered what data comes next, because we know that data is not changing. I'll tell you what are the use cases where you will have to do that also. Okay. All right. So that being said, this was about the technical walkthrough. Pause it here. If you want, go back few minutes, see what I've told you technically. Now let's learn about in simple plain language of how to understand, how to write it in our application. All right. So today I'm going to use some whiteboarding for you. Okay. And I'm going to explain you everything in detail. So this will help a lot of our developer friends who are beginning or new to these frameworks. So if you're coming from Java or .NET or any two-tier architecture, right, you would have something called a client and you would have something called a server, right? Client will make a request and server will process that data request. So you make a request here. Okay, client will make a request for new data, server will return it back. This is a typical two-tier architecture that you would know from any applications you worked upon. It's a request or response architecture, right? This is the typical one that happens, that used to happen a few years back before observables. Now, what happens here is, let's say this server is sending a data, which is say A, right? Which is sending a data A. So client will get the data when it requests, and in the UI we will display A. Now after a certain period of time, this data got changed. Now why will the data change? Because of various reasons. Let's say order is completed, delivered, or ready, right? So the status can change, the user can become active to inactive, bank transfer can be pending, can be done, etc., right? So there are a lot of logic because of which your data may change. Okay, so what happens now is that the new value became B. Here the new value became B. It was A earlier, it became B, but client doesn't know about it yet. It is still showing A because it did not make a new request. To get the data B, it has to make a new request, get the new data. This is very costly and tedious process, right? It slows down the entire architecture. Now that's where comes into picture the observables. Let me draw this now with observables into picture. So we have client here, we have a server here, same, we have a client, we have a server, but now what we have is something called an observable, right? Observable. So what this does, this will continuously listen for any data changes. Okay, you're binding it and saying that continuously listen for any data that gets changed, right? Now, not necessarily only to this client server, right? If you talk about Angular framework, Angular uses observable internally also. So you can have something like this. You don't need this also, right? This is also fine with Angular. Like you have HTTP or you have forms which are listening to internally to Angular, right? But I'm talking and explaining about HTTP here. So that's why I'm taking this example, that we have a client, we have an observable which will listen for data changes. Now what happens is, whenever you have the new data now, it automatically gets into observable. Observable will produce that value or will emit the value in technical terms, right? So now see what happens. You have the data A here. We have the data A. Over period of time, that data became B. Since we have an observable, it will take A and send A to the client. Data got changed B, it will send it to B. Now the client which was displaying A, so let's take this example, or rather let me just remove this for now. Right, so let's say we have the data A. Observable is listening to this. It will get the data A and print it in the UI, which is A. Right, so far it's simple. Now the data got changed. Data got changed to B. Observable will fetch that new data, automatically emit it. It will come to client, and now client will show status B. Right, so what we are doing, it is continuously listening to getting this data. Okay, and I told you having an observable will not do anything. We need to subscribe to it. That's where subscribe comes into picture. Right, so this is subscribe. So you have an observable, we subscribe to it, then only we can get the data, otherwise we cannot get the data. Right, so we have the client, it has an observable. It will say whenever there is new data, take it and get the data. And so subscribe means whenever there is change in data, provide it back real time data. Right, that is the dynamic data gets updated. Okay, so this is the simplest example I can tell you to relate. Now let me talk in terms of Angular framework. Right, now Angular framework uses like this. See, we have forms, we have HTTP, we have routing, we have interpolation. Right, so anything that changes in your application. Right, now these are all the things that we use. Right, these are all the modules that we are using in Angular. Now this is your application on top of it, Angular application. Okay, now this is our Angular application. Right, so we use underlining all this, and they all are implementing observables inside the framework here. That means whenever there is a change in the form, there is a change detection strategy that gets triggered. Right, everything is a tree structure in Angular, and it will know and it will update the state accordingly. That means whenever there is any change, since it's all observable, these are all subscribing to it. So whenever there is change, anything and everything in Angular is observable. Think of that way. Right, whenever you change anything, whenever you make any change, it will produce that value. Right, and since they will subscribe to it, you will get the latest data in your application. Right, so that is how internally it's designed, but this is only for your understanding, like how things are connected. Okay, I hope this makes sense to you. I hope at least you are now comfortable with the concept of observable, which is observable will produce data. Right, which will produce data and send it over a period of time. You have forms data, anything changed, it will have an observable which gets triggered and change detection is triggered. So similarly, now let's talk about hands-on. Okay, we will do some hands-on related to this. I hope this has made sense to you. Now your concepts are clear. Observable will emit data over a period of time. Subscribe will listen to that data, and it's our logic what we write of what we want to do with that data. Okay, that being said, this was about my attempt to explain it in simple terms to help you understand about the concepts of observable and subscribe. Now let's do a lot of hands-ons to even better and master observable. Let's get started. So what I'm going to do, first I'm going to generate everything, few things brand new, so that you know how to do it end to end. I'm here going to generate ng generate component. I'm going to say view users. Right, just a simple component where we will implement our HTTP calls. Right, so we have the data, we generated a component. Now in the app, I'm going to generate a new service, ng generate service, and I'm going to call it users. So we have a component, we have a service, that's what we'll be working with. Nothing to be done. Okay, ng generate, what, nothing to be done. Okay, that's crazy. Okay, ng generate service, service name is users. Okay, that's little odd, but let's try again, or let me just put it in users for now. Okay, ng generate service, let's say contacts. All right, so we got the contact service. Okay, so now in the users we have a service, we have a component. We'll be working with that. Okay, so first thing we'll do is let's check our app module and make sure that we have our module which I imported, users module. Okay, all good. Open users module, check for users component. This is done. I'm going to go to routing, create a simple route, nothing crazy, just simple route so that we can see the output of what we want to do. View users. All right, now let's go to our application, and here I'm going to say view users and see view user works. That means our component is correctly mapped. So far so good, we are done. Now let's do the heavyweight lifting, which is first I'm going to show you how to create an observable, right? So first thing is how to create observables. In Angular, we will have HTTP call which will give us the observable, but we should know how to create an observable. There are two ways to create observable. One is using RxJS operator, which is off operator, right? Using this, we can convert any array into observable. Okay, this is first technique. The second technique is using the new keyword and using observable method. Okay, class. Let's see that in action now. So what I'm going to do, first I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it contacts. And as a best practice, always remember that whenever, always add $sign to variables, right? To variables so that you know that they are observables. Okay, that's a standard practice in most coding standards. So now see, I know that what I'm going to do this, it will be a observable, and I'm going to have a simple array, right? So let's do that. I'm going to say this dot users is equal to, let's give some names. Let's say Lisa. Okay, so some names I'm giving. Now I've simple array, right? It's an array and I'm just assigning some values to it. Now using this array, I'm going to create an observable. And how do we do that? So first I'm going to say this dot contacts is equal to, we are going to use an operator of RxJS, which is off. Okay, you see here RxJS internal observable, select off this dot users. So I'm saying off will take, if you take the definition, it says it will convert into arguments and will give you an observable. Okay, so I'm saying take this array, convert it into a observable. Now you can do a console log and just verify quickly that is it an observable. You should be able to see that as an observable. Okay, so see here, observable, we got that recorded here. So very good. So we got an observable. Now the other technique is, this is technique number one to create an observable. Now I told you there is technique number two, which is using new observable. Okay, so let's do that also. New observable, again you will import this from RxJS. See, observable and off operator. All right, so we are going to saying, we are saying there is a new observable. Let's create a new observable, and then we are going to say subscribe to it, right? Whenever we will do, we'll need a subscription to it, right? So we are going to say, instead you can call it any name, okay guys? So there is no restriction that this is a keyword. This can be any name that you want. Now I'm saying this is a new observable which will produce some value. Okay, so we learned that observable will emit values over period of time, right? That means it will send multiple values. So let's make this observable send some values. I'm going to use set timeout, and I'm going to say after 2 seconds, then we are going to emit a new value, and that value will be observer the same name that we used here, dot. It will have next, complete, error, all those methods. So we are going to use next and saying send this value. Send this value. I'm saying this observable will send the value in progress after 2 seconds, right? Now I'm going to copy this multiple times here, and I'm saying after 2 seconds send in progress, after that send pending, after that send completed. Okay, so take a look at this observable now, right? So we have a new observable. What I'm doing here, set timeout, that after 2 seconds send in progress, after 4 seconds send pending, after 6 seconds send complete. That's what I'm saying with this observable. Okay, now do you think this will do anything in our code or in application? No, because I told you that observables are useless unless we subscribe to it. When I say subscribe, there are three ways you can do with observable. You can either subscribe, you can use toPromise, or we can pipe it. I will explain it later. Today's topic we are focusing on observable with subscribe and toPromise. So we have a new observable. It doesn't do anything yet, right? Because we need to subscribe to it, right? So subscribe is a method which will get this values emitted from the observable. This observable will send data that is here. Now we are going to capture that data that is sent by observable. So we are going to say dot and subscribe. So now we are getting the data here that is being sent by the observable. Also, if there is an error, we can add error also. You can see here. So we can say catch the error also. So a subscribe method will take two. One is data, the other is error. This is optional. Okay, this can be any name that you want. Okay, this can be any name that you want. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to say that subscribe data and error. This is optional, so even if you don't have this, that's fine. You just have to, you can just do with data also, but it's not a good practice. Always do catch the error. Okay, so how do you write subscribe? To the observable, you'll write dot subscribe and you will get the data or you will get the error. So now let's do a console log here, data, or even better, let me create here and I will say user status any, and I'm going to assign that here. I'll say this dot user status is equal to data, that the data that we got from observable, which will be these values. And if it's an error, do a console log of error. That means catch an error if there is any error. And we are going to use this in our UI and map it. Okay, so here I'm going to say, let's say user status. Okay, now see that hit here, user status is empty, it's in progress, pending, completed. Automatically it is sending the data, the UI is getting updated as soon as it gets the new data, right? Let's see it again. I am refreshing the screen. User status is empty, after 2 seconds in progress, then pending, and finally completed. So now couple of things, interesting things to note here for you. One is that we did not, right, automatically the values were reflecting, right? That's because we subscribed to the observable, right? If you don't do it, you will not get the latest data. It won't do anything. Observable will be useless unless we subscribe to it, right? So whenever, if you notice, automatically data is coming, automatically it's everything status is changing by its own, right? That is the benefit of using observable, that you don't have to do any work. If data changes, it will immediately reflect in the application. That is the biggest advantage. Okay, so this was about observable part for you. Now let's take this third example. Okay, this is example 1. where we just saw how to create an observable using of operator. And similarly for this also you can do the same, this dot contacts dot, right? So this is an observable, so you can convert it and make a subscribe, or basically you will process it, right, using an observer. This is the second example where you have example number 2 where you're creating a new observable. Now where do you create such things, right? Where do you need to create? So so where to create new observable? So when you're writing your unit tests, right? Whenever you're writing unit tests, you will need to pass some kind of mock data to your service, to your components, etc. Right? That's where you will create new observable and send data. This is the cheapest one that you can use to mock data. So you should know that. That's why I covered it. So make sure that you go through it. Now let me show you with HTTP. Okay, observable and subscribe with HTTP. This is what you will be doing most of the time when you do API work, API and UI integration. Okay, very, very important. So let's see this now. So what we are going to do, I'm going to go here. Let's this method. This is getting a little polluted, but that's okay for now. So example number 3. Okay, so first we will go to our app module, right? And if you see here, I injected HTTP client module. Okay, HTTP client module, because in the service I'll need that. Okay, so here I'm going to, in the service I'm going to add instance of HTTP client. Okay, and if you don't inject the client module, HTTP client module, you will get an error. That's why I did it here. So you make sure that you do it before you work here in the service. So I got the HTTP instance. Now what I'm going to say is I'm going to create a new method and I'm going to say get users. Let's say there is a method like this. Okay, now what we are going to say, we are just going to say return this dot HTTP dot, which let's say get call, and we'll pass a URL. That's it. So what we are saying, we will make a request to a URL endpoint and get the data back. So if you want to try with something, you can try these dummy or fake APIs. They are freely available from JSON placeholder. I'm going to use one here. So here I'm saying slash users. That means return me 10 users. So this URL will return me 10 users. So now we got the get users. Remember that by default it will be returning an observable of type object. Okay, Angular by default returns observable object. Remember this, because a lot of times people ask you in interviews, and you should know this because this is very, very important information. You don't want to miss that. So by default Angular will return observable of type object. It's just an object, that's what it will return. Okay, so let's go to our service, contact service, and we are just returning it. Now in the component, what I'm going to do, first let's inject the instance in the constructor. I'm going to say private, I'm going to say user service. Oh, this is contact service, contact service, contact service, right? Again, this is a good nomenclature that use the same service name but with small c. This here it will be caps. So contact service, then you will say this dot contact service dot get users, right? Now take the mouse over it and you will see that it is returning observable object. That means this method will return an observable. And what did we learn here? That if we get an observable, what we need to do? We need to subscribe to it, right? So we'll write dot subscribe, and what we'll do, we will get the data, right? Just like how we did here. This was an observable, we subscribe to it, we got the data. This is a service method. In this we are making a call to this URL which will return us the data. Then in the component we are saying dot subscribe, we will get the data, and I'm going to say list users. Okay, and I'm going to assign this dot list users is equal to data. Okay, whatever data I get from the endpoint URL, I'm mapping it to list users. If there is any error, capture it in the console log for now. Okay, and let's use this dot list data. Okay, and we are going to say ng_for is equal to let user of. And I told you, as a good practice, whenever you are returning an observable, it's important to see. I know that this is an array, but let's say for your comfort, I'm just adding this dollar so that we know that it's an observable we are working with. All right, so we got the this dot list users observable. I'm getting it here, and I'm going to print the user details, and I'm going to say name. I hope it's name. Let's see. Okay, so now go to your application, and it is bringing all the names, right? So if you want to see what is the name of what is the object that we got, you put JSON, and we will see that these are the details we are getting from that API, like name, username, email, right? So let's do one thing. If just to show you that it is working real time, I'm going to update it to email, and you see now we got all the emails, right? So let's format it a little bit. User.name and then followed by the email, right? So we got the username and followed by the email address, right? So see how easy it is to understand about observable and subscribe, right? Now whenever there is data change, this will update and we will have the latest data automatically. Okay, that's where we will use subscribe because it is continuously listening. Okay, now let's take another example where, so you will write http method dot subscribe, you will get data and you will use the data to process. Okay, that's what subscribe does. Now this is good use case when if data changes, it will automatically reflect changes in the application. Okay, changes in the application. But what if I know that data will not change, right? There are use cases, right? There are use cases like, for example, activate user. Okay, let's say activate user is an example, okay, that we are doing. You will activate user only once, correct? Activate email, you will do it only once. Or you can say validate or send SMS for verification, or say OTP, right? One time password. So these are all things where you know that you will make call only once and your data will not change, right? Here data will change when you subscribe. That means you are expecting this data can change, and that's why you subscribed, so that you can get new data whenever that happens, right? Let's see here again, relate to this. See here, there is data which will change in progress, right? Pending. So you know that this data is changing, that's why you subscribe to it, correct? But I know that I'm going to make a call, I'm going to make an API call, but the data will not change. Let's see that example to use toPromise. Okay, so that's where you will use toPromise. That means make a call, and once you get data, do not watch or get other data that you get, right? So let's see this now. Stop, that means stop listening, stop subscribing. It means stop listening for more data changes. That's what it means. Okay, toPromise. Let's see that in action. I'm going to go back to service and create a new method. I'll say get user. This is get users. It will get all users. I'm saying get, or I'll say view user. You have particular views. So view user, what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy it here, and here I will change it and say /1. Okay, now see here, when you say this is the number one user, which is Lane Graham, right? So we are going to get this user when we say /1. So save it, and I'm going to use this in the component, and I'm going to say here this dot contacts service dot get view user dot. Okay, so see, now I'm going to write to promise. Here I use subscribe to watch changes that I'll get. Whenever there is new data changes that I get, automatically update my list users. But here I'm saying to promise. That means get the data once and stop. So here, now I'm going to say, okay. So here we are going to say, sorry, not this code. So here we are going to use to promise. Now see, with to promise, there are few things that you have to understand and be careful about. Okay, and that is then and error. Okay, so those are the two things that you should be really be careful about. So let's see that. I'll make the notes. One second. So here, okay. So whenever we say to promise, right, it means that we are going to get then and error. Okay, let's see. Catch. So how do you write it? So then and catch is what we will do. So let's, okay. So here, let me first write the code for you here. So we will write to promise. That means we are going to say this dot contact service dot view user dot to promise, and then we'll say dot. See here now. These are the three things that we will do. We will say dot then, dot catch will catch the error. Last, if you want to do something, you'll use dot finally. So let me show you what the code is. So we'll say dot then. That means when you make a call to this URL, you will get an observable. Just get that only once. Get the data once. Once you get the data, stop. Then don't listen. So then you will say once you get data, then you would, so then you will say you get response, right? Once you make a promise, you get the data, then you have response. And here I'm going to say user details. Okay, so here I'm going to say this dot user details is equal to response. So see, I'm saying to promise dot then. This you have to write every time. Yes, a lot of times people will ask, what should we implement this? Yes, we have to implement then catch. Not mandatory. It's not mandatory. This is good code. This will work, but this is not a good code because you're not doing the error handling. So here I'm saying make a call to this URL. You will get data once. Once you get the data, stop it. The promise is resolved. Here in subscribe, you will keep listening to the data. To promise, you get the data, then what you do? Then you do this, which is with this response. Else, catch the error that you get, right? And we can also say dot finally, right? What you want to do with it, right? So we can say console.log user details loaded. Okay, or I can just, instead of this, I'm going to say this dot user message is equal to, and here we'll define one user message variable again. Okay, so see this code again. We got the service, we are calling a method, and this method will call this endpoint to get one data of user, particular data of a user. Then we are saying to promise. That means once you get the data from the URL, from the endpoint, stop. Do not look further. The promise is resolved, right? That means promise is done. Do not listen for further changes. It will only make a call once, get the data once. And here you are saying this dot user details, map that response to this, and catch if there are any errors, or finally, that means once this all thing is done, finally update the message, right? So save it and let's work on the UI part now. So in the HTML, I'm just going to print this data. Okay, so here I'm going to say paragraph, and here I'm going to say user details JSON. Okay, and I'm going to say ng if is equal to user message, then print the user message. That means if there is a message, then just show it. Okay, let's see it in action. So user details loaded, and here, so user details are loaded. Where is our message? Let's see that. User details loaded. Okay, so this is the message that we are seeing, right? So now let me format it a little bit for you so we know. Here again I'm going to put the same details, name slash name, and I'm going to print one more, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to say email. Okay, sorry, this is not the one we should have. It will be error because it's a message, not the correct object. So here I am going to add it user details dot name, and here I will copy and paste it here and say email. Okay, perfect. All right, so now you see this. I'm not a very big fan, so let's do this here. Status. Okay, just to make it a little interesting for you, I'm just putting some style sheet. Background color, pick any color, light blue for now. Okay, so you see here user details loaded, the same user and the same email, right? But this will only load once. It will not show you again. Okay, even if there is some change happened, this will not pick it up because we said that make call only once, that is to promise, right? And we wrote then, catch, and finally. Okay, so see, it made a call to the URL, got the data, loaded this object, finally it is updating the user message. Okay, so that is how toPromise works. Now let's take it to the last section, which is observables and typecasting. Now what we are saying here is typecasting. Typecasting means right now if you see everything we did, this is all object, right? If you see here, it is observable object, right? But you can typecast it. So you can say here, you can create an interface, say user, and here we will say name, right, is string, and then we are going to say email, which is again string, and we are going to say ID, which is a number. Okay, simple. So I'm going to say that this is a model, right? Basically think of it like a model. So I'm going to say when this observable should give me a type user. It will give you error here because you did not specify it here. Okay, so now see what I'm doing. I've created an interface and I'm saying it has three attributes: name, email, and ID. Then I'm going to say that this dot get me an observable of type user. So now when I go to view user here, right, when I go to view user in this response, if you see, if I do dot, I will get only those three attributes that I created in the interface, because this observable will only get me these three, right? So that way you can do strict data typing. Okay, so now see this dot user details, I have response dot name. So here you don't need this again now, but I am not changing this code now for your reference, but you get the point, right? That if you see here now, these three are the same that we added in our interface. That is the typecasting, right? Basically, so if in the observable you can tell what type of object you want. Like in this case, we are saying user, right? So you create a user object interface or a model and have some attributes like name, email, ID. Use them in the component and you can typecast it and say if you want to do some kind of mapping. Okay, so this is one of the ways that you do observable and typecasting. Okay, so the thumb rule is simple. You would have used it anywhere, like most of the places you would have used. The thumb rule is create an interface, the model or interface, right? Typecast observable observable by adding like this and putting the type. Okay, putting the name of that interface, and you're saying I want an observable of this type. Okay, it can be an array also, that doesn't matter, it can be anything as long as your requirement is. Now I can say that this observable, it need not be object, it can be an array. So I'm going to say I am expecting an observable data which is of type user this thing, so array. So copy this, paste it here, there you go. Right, so you can have a typecasting value, and you can say it can be an array, it can be a regular one. So observable can be of any, it can return any type. Now see, it is returning an observable of type user. Here an observable will return type users array. Right, so this is how you do the typecasting. I'm going to move it back just in case if you guys need the code. Alrighty, so far so good. I hope things are clear. There is one more thing that I want to cover, but I'll cover it as part of RxJS thing, which is observable and pipes, right? So this is pretty common use case, that what you do is you get the data and you pipe it. So this is to promise. Okay, this is example 3, subscribe. Okay, and last example, this is example 4. Okay, and last but this I'll cover, like I said, with RxJS, but let me just quickly show you that also, so that in continuity I can show you. So let's say you have an observable which will be returned, right? So I'm going to use the same method that we used earlier. Now we can say dot pipe, and this will take multiple params, like it can take multiple methods like map, right? Or these are all RxJS operators. Okay, so you need to import it from RxJS, and you will say that is under the operators. But okay, I am going to leave this for the next topic because it will require me to explain RxJS operators, everything. So stay tuned for that. I will cover observable with pipe also. That's very important for you to complete your learning. I will cover that again. But I hope this is my best attempt to explain you everything about observable, subscribe, HTTP with observable, typecasting. We did a lot of hands-on examples today. I hope you really enjoy. I hope you really like and learn from it. If you like my work, please do consider buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/arttutorials. In the next episode, I will cover ng container and ng template. Then I will start covering about RxJS and testing. So there's a lot of things to learn and master in Angular, but I'm sure you are learning. That's important for me. Also, if you have any doubts, please do write to me in the comments section. I'll be more than happy to help you if you have any queries. Thank you again. I hope you like it. If you do, please do share this video with all your friends and colleagues to help them learn as well. Thanks to you, and let's join in the next episode.